The wind carried more dust than promise across Red Willow's main street, coating everything in a fine layer of Wyoming dirt. Clara Whitmore stood at her husband's grave, the wooden cross already weathered, though Thomas had been in the ground barely 3 months. The cemetery sat on a rise overlooking the town, and from here she could see the drought-stricken prairie stretching endlessly. Patches of grass burned brown by the relentless sun. Mrs. Whitmore. She didn't turn at the sound of Judge Harlan's voice. She had been expecting this visit, had seen the vultures circling ever since Thomas died. The judge's boots crunched on the dry earth as he approached, followed by the softer footsteps of Reverend Peyton. "Ma'am, we need to discuss your situation," Harlan said, removing his hat in what Clara supposed was meant as a show of respect. The gesture rang hollow as a dried gourd. "My situation?" Clara finally faced them, keeping her voice level. "You mean my home, my land?" Reverend Peyton cleared his throat. "The Lord provides for the righteous, Mrs. Whitmore. But the law is the law. Territorial statute is clear," Judge Harlan added, producing a folded document from his coat. "A woman without male guardianship cannot hold property rights. You have 30 days to remarry, or the land reverts to the territory for redistribution." Clara's jaw tightened. "Redistribution to whom exactly?" "Why? To those who can properly develop it. The railroad brings progress. Ma'am, progress and prosperity." She'd heard those words before, usually right before someone lost their home. "And if I refuse?" "Then you'll be removed." Harlan's voice carried no warmth. "But we're not heartless. The town council has identified a suitable candidate for marriage. A practical solution for all concerned." From behind them emerged a figure Clara knew by reputation more than acquaintance. Eli Danner moved like a man accustomed to wide spaces and few words. His eyes were the color of winter sky, cold and distant, set in a face that had seen too much weather and probably too much trouble. He worked her ranch, had for the past year, but they'd exchanged maybe a dozen words in all that time. "Mr. Danner has agreed to the arrangement," Reverend Peyton said, though Eli himself remained silent. Clara studied the cowboy. His clothes were clean but worn. His gun belt well-oiled but not fancy. Everything about him spoke of function over form. "And what does Mr. Danner get from this arrangement?" "Steady work, a roof, respectability," Harlan answered for him. "Better than drifting." Eli's expression didn't change, but something flickered in those winter eyes. "I owe a debt to Thomas," he said finally, his voice low and rough as creek gravel. "He gave me work when others wouldn't. This squares it." "How romantic," Clara said dryly. She looked back at Thomas's grave, then at the men waiting for her answer. In her pocket, her fingers found the small notebook she'd discovered in Thomas's desk that morning, its pages torn and scattered. One piece had caught her eye, the torn edge showing traces of ink. "Vexler Willow Creek Survey Stakes. I need time to consider," she said. 3 days, Harlan replied. "The law gives 30 days notice, but I'm filing the paperwork early, for efficiency's sake." After they left, Clara remained by the grave. The wind picked up, rattling the wooden cross. She pulled out the notebook fragment again, studying the partial words. Thomas had been investigating something before he died. The railroad agent, Silas Vexler, had arrived in town 6 months ago with his gold pocket watch and Eastern manners. Now her husband was dead and she was being forced into marriage or exile. "You're thinking too loud." Clara startled. Eli had returned, moving quiet as a shadow despite his size. "I didn't ask for your opinion, Mr. Danner." "Didn't offer one." He stood beside her, looking out at the prairie rather than at her. "Just stating a fact." "Why did you agree to this?" He was quiet long enough that she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Like I said, debt to Thomas. That's all. That's all that matters." He shifted, and she caught sight of the Colt on his hip, worn smooth at the grip. If we do this, I'll need to know the terms. Clara almost laughed at the businesslike tone. Terms for marriage. For the arrangement. His eyes finally met hers. I'm not looking to own anything that can think for itself. Mrs. Whitmore, you want to keep your land. I'll help you keep it, but I'll need my own space, my own work, and no questions about my past. And in return, I'll work the ranch, handle the stock, deal with anyone who comes calling with ideas about a widow's property. You'll have the protection of the law and a name on the deed. It was more words than she'd heard him string together before. Clara considered her options: marry this taciturn stranger or lose everything Thomas had built. The notebook fragment seemed to burn in her pocket. No sharing a room, she said. This is business, nothing more. Suits me. And I handle the books, the money, any legal matters. You're the one with learning. She studied his weathered face, searching for deception and finding only that winter sky stare. Why do I feel like I'm making a deal with the devil? The corner of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile. Devil would offer better terms. That startled a laugh from her, short and sharp. 3 days, then we'll draw up papers, make it legal and binding. A business partnership. Partnership, he repeated, testing the word. Then he touched his hat brim and walked away, his boots raising small clouds of dust. Clara returned to the ranch house as the sun began its descent. The place felt too large, too empty without Thomas's presence. She went to his study, still untouched since his death, and began searching through his papers more carefully. If someone had wanted him dead, there had to be a reason. She found more torn pages, as if someone had gone through the notebook in haste. Piecing together what she could, a picture emerged: survey markers being moved, property lines redrawn, all along Willow Creek where the railroad was planning its route, and Vexler's name appeared again and again, always partially obscured or torn away. A knock at the door interrupted her search. She found a young boy on her porch, perhaps 10 years old, clothes dusty from hard travel. Ma'am, Sheriff Thomas said if anything bad happened, I should come find you. Clara's heart clenched. What's your name, son? Sam, ma'am. Sam Morrison. I've been walking 2 days from Cutter's Ridge. She brought him inside, gave him water and some cold biscuit. What kind of bad thing happened, Sam? Men came to our place. Papa wouldn't sell to the railroad man. Next day, our well went bad. Day after that, Papa took sick. Mama sent me away before... His voice trailed off. Where's your family now? So, don't know. Mama just said find the sheriff's wife, that you'd know what to do. Clara looked at this child, another victim of whatever was happening in the territory. She thought of Eli's words, a partnership. Perhaps she'd need more than just a name on a deed to fight what was coming. You'll stay here tonight, she told Sam. Tomorrow we'll figure out the rest. The boy nodded, exhaustion clear in his young face. As Clara prepared a bed for him in the small room off the kitchen, her resolve hardened. Someone was playing a dangerous game with people's lives and land. Thomas had died trying to stop it. She wouldn't let his death be for nothing. And if that meant marrying a man with winter eyes and a mysterious past, so be it. But it would be on her terms, for her purposes. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows. Somewhere in the darkness, a coyote called, long and mournful. Clara checked the loads in Thomas's shotgun and set it by the door. Whatever came next, she'd be ready. The wedding took place on a Tuesday morning, witnessed by a handful of townspeople who'd come more for the spectacle than support. Clara wore her best dress, a simple gray wool that Thomas had liked, and tried not to think about how different this was from her first wedding day. Eli stood beside her in what appeared to be his only good shirt, his expression unreadable as Reverend Peyton droned through the ceremony. "Do you take this woman?" The Reverend's words seemed to hover in the dusty air of the small church. "I do," Eli said, his voice steady and matter-of-fact. When her turn came, Clara forced the words out, "I do." And just like that, she was Mrs. Danner. The few witnesses dispersed quickly, eager to spread the news. Within an hour, all of Red Willow would know that the sheriff's widow had married the brooding cowboy. Outside the church, Clara pulled on her gloves with sharp movements. "I'll need to file the paperwork with Judge Harland immediately." "I'll come with you," Eli said. "That's not necessary." "It is." His tone brooked no argument. "You're my wife now. In law, if nothing else. Where you go in this town, I go." Clara studied him, surprised by the protective edge in his voice. "Fine, but let me do the talking." The judge's office smelled of tobacco and old leather. Harlan looked up from his desk with poorly concealed disappointment. "Mrs. Danner, that was quick." "The law gave me 30 days. I used 3. Clara placed their marriage certificate on his desk. "I trust this satisfies the territorial requirements." Harlan examined the document with the air of a man looking for flaws in a diamond, finding none. He stamped it with obvious reluctance. "For now." "What's that supposed to mean?" Eli spoke for the first time since entering the office. The judge's eyes flickered nervously to the cowboy. "Simply that marriages of convenience are sometimes questioned. The territory has an interest in ensuring that property remains in capable hands." "My wife's hands seem plenty capable to me," Eli said quietly. Something in his tone made Harlan shift in his chair. "Of course. Good day to you both." As they left the office, Clara caught Eli's arm. "I can fight my own battles." "Never said you couldn't." He looked down at her hand on his sleeve, and she quickly removed it. "But battles are easier when you're not fighting alone." That evening, they returned to the ranch to find chaos. The fence along the eastern pasture had been cut, and 20 head of cattle were missing. Sam, who'd been watching the house, ran out to meet them. "Riders came through about an hour ago," the boy reported breathlessly. 5 or 6 of them. They headed toward Willow Creek with the cattle." Eli's expression darkened. "Stay here with Clara." "Where are you going?" Clara demanded. "To get your cattle back." "Not alone. You're not—" She moved toward the house. "Let me get Thomas's rifle." "No." The word came out sharp. Eli softened his tone. "Someone needs to watch the boy. And if they come back while I'm gone—" He didn't need to finish. Clara understood. "Be careful." Something flickered in his eyes' surprise. Maybe always am. He was gone within minutes, riding out on his gray gelding with his rifle across the saddle. Clara watched until he disappeared over a rise, then turned to find Sam staring at her with worried eyes. "He'll be fine," she said, as much for herself as for the boy. "Come on, let's get supper started." The hours crawled by. Clara tried to keep busy, teaching Sam to mend harness while they waited. The boy was quick to learn, his small fingers surprisingly deft with the leather and all. "You knew my husband?" Clara asked as they worked. Sam nodded. "Sheriff Thomas came out to Cutter's Ridge regular. He was asking questions about the survey markers, about men moving stakes at night. Papa told him what we'd seen." "What had you seen?" "Men with lanterns out by the creek. They'd dig up the official markers and move them. Papa said it was stealing, pure and simple. Stealing land by inches." Clara's hand stilled on the leather. "Did your father tell anyone else?" "Just the sheriff. Said Thomas was the only honest lawman in 3 counties. A sound outside made them both freeze horses approaching fast. Clara grabbed the shotgun and positioned herself by the window. But it was Eli who rode into view, driving 15 head of cattle before him. His shirt was torn and there was blood on his sleeve. Clara rushed outside. "You're hurt." "It's nothing." He swung down from his horse, favoring his left arm. "Only got 15 back. They'd already moved the rest too far." "Come inside. That needs cleaning." He started to protest, then seemed to think better of it. In the kitchen, Clara examined the wound, a deep graze along his upper arm. "Bullet?" she asked. trying to keep her voice steady. Rock, horse threw one of them into a boulder. He sat still while she cleaned the wound, his jaw tight. Big Jim Sawyer was with them. Clara knew the name one of Vexler's hired muscle. Did they say anything? Plenty. Nothing worth repeating in front of the boy. His eyes found Sam, who was hovering in the doorway. You did good today, keeping watch? Sam straightened with pride. As Clara wrapped Eli's arm, she found herself studying her new husband's profile. There was a steadiness to him, a quiet competence that reminded her why Thomas had trusted him. Thank you, she said quietly, for getting them back. It's what partners do. The next few days brought a steady stream of incidents. A water trough destroyed, fence posts pulled up, feed contaminated with kerosene. The message was clear. Clara might have satisfied the law, but she hadn't satisfied everyone. The confrontation came on Saturday night at the Dusty Star Saloon. Clara had gone into town for supplies, Eli accompanying her as had become their pattern. While she handled business at Morrison's general store, Eli waited outside, leaning against a post and watching the street with those winter eyes. Well, the new Mr. Whitmore. Big Jim Sawyer's voice carried across the street. He stood with 3 other men outside the saloon, all of them showing the effects of afternoon drinking. Eli didn't respond, didn't even shift position. Heard you took my cattle back, Sawyer continued, moving closer. That wasn't neighborly. Wasn't your cattle. Everything's negotiable in this territory. Friend, even wives, apparently. Sawyer's grin was ugly. How much did she pay you to marry her? Must have been good money for a saddle tramp to tie himself down. Clara emerged from the store in time to hear the last comment. She saw Eli's stance change subtly, weight shifting to the balls of his feet. Mr. Sawyer, she called out, her voice carrying the same authority Thomas had always admired. I believe you have business elsewhere. Sawyer's attention swiveled to her, and his grin widened. Mrs. Danner, looking lovely as always. Shame about Thomas. He was too rigid, didn't understand how things work out here. He understood the difference between right and wrong. Did he? Is that why he's dead? The words hung in the air like a challenge. Clara felt Eli tense beside her, but before he could move, she stepped forward. Are you confessing to something, Mr. Sawyer? The big man's face flushed. I'm saying accidents happen, especially to people who don't mind their own business. Like you're about to have an accident. The voice came from behind them. Sam stood there with an old Walker Colt that he could barely lift, pointing it in Sawyer's general direction. Clara's heart nearly stopped. Sam, put that down, she said carefully. He threatened you, ma'am. Eli moved then, smooth and easy, stepping between the boy and Sawyer. Give me the gun, son. For a moment, Clara thought Sam might refuse. Then, reluctantly, he handed over the heavy revolver. Eli checked it with practiced movements unloaded. She realized with relief. Smart woman, Eli said to her quietly, teaching him to show iron without lead. He turned back to Sawyer, who had gone pale at the sight of the gun. You were leaving. It wasn't a question. Sawyer's hand twitched toward his holster, then stopped as he met Eli's gaze. Something in those winter eyes made him step back. This isn't over, Sawyer muttered, but he was already retreating. His companions followed, shooting dark looks over their shoulders. When they were gone, Clara knelt beside Sam. Where did you get that gun? Found it in the barn. I just wanted to help. You did help, Eli said before Clara could respond. You gave me time to move, but next time, you tell us first. Deal. Sam nodded solemnly. Deal. That night, after Sam was asleep, Clara found Eli on the porch, watching the darkness. The boys got sand, he said as she joined him. Thomas kept that old walker in the barn for scaring coyotes. I didn't know Sam had found it. He's trying to protect you. Can't fault him for that. Clara studied Eli's profile in the moonlight. You didn't draw on Sawyer. Didn't need to, but you wanted to. He was quiet for a long moment. What I want and what I do are two different things. Have been for a while now. She thought about asking more, about the past he kept locked away. Instead, she said, Sawyer all but admitted they killed Thomas. Yeah. We need proof. We need to be careful. Vexler's got the judge in his pocket and half the town on his payroll. Your husband learned that the hard way. Our husband, Clara almost said, then caught herself. This arrangement was business, nothing more. But as she watched Eli scan the darkness for threats, she wondered if the lines were already beginning to blur. I'm going to keep digging, she said finally. Thomas left those notes for a reason. Then we dig together. He glanced at her. That's what partners do, remember? A coyote howled in the distance, answered by another. The night pressed close, full of unseen dangers. But for the first time since Thomas died, Clara didn't feel entirely alone. Partners, she agreed, and meant it. The drought deepened its grip on the territory as September crept toward October. Each morning, Clara woke to skies the color of beaten brass. Not a cloud in sight. The well water dropped another foot, and the grass crackled underfoot like old bones. We need to move the herd, Eli announced over breakfast, his coffee cup leaving another ring on the scarred wooden table. There's a hidden spring up in the Red Rock Canyons. Saw it years back when I was... He stopped, catching himself. When you were what? Clara asked, but he was already standing, reaching for his hat. We leave at first light tomorrow, all of us. Clara had never driven cattle any distance, but she wasn't about to admit it. That afternoon, Eli taught her the basics how to read the herd's movement, when to press and when to let them settle. You don't force cattle, he explained, demonstrating with his horse. You suggest they're like people that way. Push too hard, they scatter. Sam proved a natural, whooping and guiding the stragglers with enthusiasm that made up for his inexperience. By evening, Clara's muscles ached in places she'd forgotten existed, but she'd kept up. Not bad for a town woman, Eli observed as they made camp. I wasn't always a town woman. Clara stretched her sore shoulders. Grew up on a farm in Ohio, small, nothing like this. But I knew work. What made you come west? Thomas? She smiled at the memory. He had such dreams. Said we'd build something lasting out here, away from all the crowds and corruption back east. Eli poked at their small fire with a stick. He was a good man. You knew him before he became sheriff. Some. Eli's guard was up again. That wall he built around his past. But then Sam returned from gathering buffalo chips for fuel. And the moment passed. They reached the canyon the next day, winding through red stone passages that grew narrower with each turn. Clara began to worry they'd boxed themselves in when Eli led them around a final bend into a hidden valley. Green grass grew thick around a natural spring bubbling from the rocks. How did you know about this place? Sam asked, eyes wide with wonder. Man pays attention. He learns things. Eli dismounted to test the water. Sweet and clean. We'll rest here today. Head back tomorrow. While the cattle spread out to graze, Clara explored the canyon walls. Ancient drawings marked some of the stone's stick figures and spirals, messages from people long gone. She was tracing one with her finger when she heard Eli approach. Indians use this place for generations, he said. Sacred spot. They called it good medicine. You speak as if you knew them. Knew some. He pointed to a particular symbol. That one means sanctuary, place of safety. Clara turned to study him. Were you running from something when you found this place? His smile was rueful. Isn't everyone running from something? That night, as Sam slept by the fire, Clara couldn't rest. The canyon walls seemed to press close, holding secrets. She found Eli standing watch, rifle across his knees. "Can't sleep?" he asked without turning. "Too much quiet. Sounds strange, I know." "No, quiet can be louder than noise sometimes." He shifted to make room on the rock beside him. "First time I came here, I couldn't sleep either. Kept waiting for the other shoe to drop." "What were you running from?" He was silent so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Myself, mostly. The things I'd done to survive." "We all do things to survive." "Not like I did." His voice was flat, empty. "I hired out my gun after the war. Rode with some hard men, did hard things. One day I looked in a mirror and didn't recognize the man staring back." Clara waited, sensing more. "There was a job in Kansas. Railroad wanted some squatters moved off prime land. I went with the crew they hired." He stared into the darkness. "There was a family, man, woman, 3 kids. They wouldn't leave. My partner wanted to burn them out." "What did you do?" "I stopped him. Put a bullet in his shoulder when he went for a torch. Then I got on my horse and rode until I found this place." He touched his rifle absently. "Thomas found me here 6 months later, half-starved and all the way crazy. Offered me work instead of a bullet or a rope." "He saw something in you worth saving. He saw a broken tool that might still have use." Eli turned to her then. "I'm not a good man. Clara, important you know that. I'm just trying to be better than I was." The moonlight caught the planes of his face, highlighting old pain. Without thinking, Clara reached out and touched his arm. Thomas was rarely wrong about people. Eli looked at her hand on his sleeve, then at her face. Something shifted in the air between them, heavy as the coming storm. Then a coyote howled nearby, breaking the spell. Clara withdrew her hand, confused by the race of her pulse. "You should rest," Eli said roughly. "Long ride tomorrow." The journey back to the ranch proved eventful. They'd barely cleared the canyon when they spotted a dust cloud on the horizon. Eli pulled up sharp, studying it. "Riders, 6, maybe 7. He turned to Clara. "Take Sam and the herd into that dry wash. Stay hidden until I signal." "What are you going to do?" "Talk, if they'll let me." His hand checked the Colt at his hip. "Go! Now!" Clara wanted to argue, but Sam was already looking scared. She led him and the cattle into the shallow ravine, then positioned herself where she could watch the approaching riders. They were Vexler's men, led by Big Jim Sawyer. They surrounded Eli in a loose circle, hands resting on weapons. "Danner," Sawyer called out. "Heard you were moving cattle. Thought we'd check brands, make sure none of them wandered from neighboring spreads." "Every head belongs to the Whitmore Ranch," Eli replied calmly. "Danner Ranch now, isn't it?" Sawyer grinned. "Unless that marriage ain't real. Judge Harlan's mighty interested in that question." "The marriage is legal. Legal and real ain't always the same thing." Sawyer leaned forward in his saddle. "For instance, I'm betting you and the widow keep separate beds. Bet you haven't laid a hand on her. That makes it fraud. Friend." Clara saw Eli's shoulders tense. When he spoke, his voice was winter cold. "What happens between my wife and me isn't your business or the judge's." "It is if it affects property rights." Sawyer's grin widened. "Course, we could forget all about it. Mister, Vexler's a reasonable man. He'd pay good money for that stretch along Willow Creek, more than the whole ranch is worth. Truth be told. Not interested. You sure because questions are being asked. About you, about where you came from. Some say you rode with Bloody Bill Anderson during the war. Some say worse." Eli's horse shifted, sensing its rider's tension. "Some say a lot of things." "They do indeed. Be a shame if the territorial marshal heard those stories. They still hang war criminals, you know." Clara had heard enough. She pulled Thomas's rifle from the saddle scabbard and fired into the air. The shot echoed off the canyon walls like thunder. Sawyer's men reached for weapons, but Eli's Colt was already out and aimed. "Easy," Eli said softly. "Nobody needs to die today." Clara emerged from the wash, rifle ready. "Mr. Sawyer, you're trespassing. Again." Sawyer's face flushed red. "You can't protect him forever, Mrs. Danner. Man's past always catches up." "Then I guess we'll face it when it does." She kept the rifle steady. "Now get off our land." After a long moment, Sawyer wheeled his horse around. "This ain't over, not by half." When they were gone, Eli holstered his weapon and looked at Clara with something like wonder. "That was foolish." "That was necessary." She lowered the rifle, hands trembling now that the danger had passed. "Partners, remember." That evening, back at the ranch, Clara found herself restless again. The confrontation with Sawyer had shaken something loose questions about Eli's past, about who she'd married. She found him in the barn, working on worn leather by lamplight. "Bloody Bill Anderson?" she asked from the doorway. Eli's hand stilled. "No, but I knew men who rode with him, learned things from them I wish I could forget." "Are you wanted somewhere?" "Not that I know of, but Sawyer's right, I've done things that could see me hanged if the wrong people decided to make an issue of it." Clara entered the barn, drawn by the pain in his voice. "Tell me the worst of it." He set down the leather, flexed his scarred hands. "There was a town in Missouri, after the war, but still plenty of hate floating around. I hired on to protect a carpetbagger judge. Local boys didn't take kindly to that." He paused, struggling with the words. "Things went bad. The judge was dirty, selling pardons to the highest bidder. When the locals came for him, I did my job. 3 men died." "You were protecting your employer." "I was protecting a criminal for money." His laugh was bitter. "Found out later he'd sent those boys' fathers to prison on false charges, then bought their land cheap. I helped a thief keep what he'd stolen." Clara moved closer, close enough to see the weight he carried in every line of his body. In the lamplight, she noticed scars she'd missed before, a map of violence written on his skin. Without thinking, she reached out to touch a particularly cruel mark visible above his collar. Eli went completely still. "Don't!" "Why not?" "Because I'm trying to keep my word, about this being business." The air between them crackled with tension. Clara's hand remained on his shoulder, feeling the warmth through worn cloth. Maybe the terms need renegotiating. He turned then, eyes dark with something that wasn't quite warning. "You don't know what you're saying." "Don't I?" She met his gaze steadily. "I'm saying maybe we're both tired of being alone. Maybe—" The barn door burst open. Sam stood there, face pale with excitement and fear. "Riders coming, lots of them." Eli moved instantly, grabbing his rifle. "How many?" 10, maybe more. They got torches." Clara's blood ran cold. They were coming to burn them out, just as Eli had once nearly done to another family. The bitter irony wasn't lost on her as they ran for the house. "Take Sam upstairs," Eli ordered. "Watch from the windows, but keep down." "What are you going to do?" "What I have to—" He checked his ammunition with practiced efficiency. "Go!" But Clara was already moving to the gun cabinet, pulling out Thomas's weapons. "Sam, you watch from upstairs. Call out what you see. Eli and I will handle this." Eli started to protest, then stopped. Something passed between them, recognition. Perhaps acceptance. They were partners in this, come what may. The riders stopped just out of rifle range, torches blazing against the night sky. But they didn't attack. Instead, one rider came forward under a white flag. It was Reverend Peyton. "Mrs. Danner," he called out. "I come in peace, seeking to prevent bloodshed." Clara kept her rifle ready. "State your business." Mr. Vexler wishes to make one final offer. Sell the creek land, and all questions about your marriage disappear. Refuse, and Judge Harland will convene a special hearing tomorrow to examine the validity of your union." On what grounds? Fraud against the territory. If your marriage is found to be a sham, you'll both face prison, and the boy will be sent to an orphan asylum. Clara felt Eli tense beside her. The threat to Sam was calculated, cruel. Tell Vexler we'll see him in court. Peyton sighed dramatically. I had hoped you would see reason. Very well, but consider is your pride worth destroying 3 lives? After he left, taking the riders with him, Clara slumped against the wall. Can they do that, take Sam? If they prove fraud, yes. Eli's jaw was granite. Maybe you should take the offer. Never. She straightened, steel in her spine. We'll face them, together. From upstairs, Sam called down. Are they gone? For now, Clara answered, then quieter. To Eli, whatever happens tomorrow, I'm glad you're here. He looked at her for a long moment. So am I, he said finally, and Clara knew he meant it. The storm built all morning, dark clouds piling up like mountains against the western horizon. By afternoon, the air hung thick and electric, making the horses stamp and toss their heads nervously. Clara had seen storms before, but something about this one felt different, portentous, as if the sky itself was choosing sides in their fight. Going to be a big one, Eli observed, securing loose boards on the barn. They'd spent the morning preparing for the hearing tomorrow, but the approaching storm demanded immediate attention. Sam helped where he could, his young face creased with worry. Will the chickens be all right? We'll get them cooped up tight, Clara assured him, though her mind was on larger concerns. Tomorrow, Judge Harland would decide their fate. Tonight, they had nature to contend with. The first fat drops fell as they finished battening down. Then, as if someone had overturned a massive bucket, the rain came in sheets. They barely made it to the house before the full fury hit. At least we'll have water in the well again, Clara said, trying for optimism as they watched from the kitchen window. Lightning split the sky, followed immediately by thunder that shook the walls. In that brilliant flash, Eli spotted something that made him curse under his breath. Fire! He was already moving, grabbing blankets from the chest. Lightning hit the dry grass past the eastern fence. Clara's heart sank. After months of drought, the prairie was tinder-dry despite the sudden rain. The wind was already spreading flames faster than the rain could douse them. Worse, the fire was moving toward the draw where they'd penned the young calves. Stay with Sam, Eli ordered. But Clara was already pulling on Thomas's old slicker. Sam, you ring the bell continuously. She told the boy. It'll help us find our way back in the smoke. Can you do that? Sam nodded, jaw set with determination. Yes, ma'am. They plunged into the storm together. The rain had turned to hail, stones the size of marbles pelting down. But it wasn't enough to stop the grass fire. Smoke mixed with rain, creating a choking fog that obscured everything beyond a few feet. The calves are this way, Clara shouted over the storm, grabbing Eli's arm when he started the wrong direction. Together they fought through the smoke and chaos, finally reaching the draw where terrified calves pressed against the fence. Gates jammed, Eli called, wrestling with the swollen wood. The fire crept closer, a line of orange death in the darkness. Clara added her strength to his, and together they forced it open just as the first flames reached the fence posts. The calves scattered in panic. Clara and Eli worked desperately to herd them away from the fire, but the smoke was thickening. Clara's eyes streamed tears, her lungs burning with each breath. When a calf stumbled into a shallow ravine, she went after it without thinking. Clara, no! Eli's shout came too late. The wind shifted, sending a wall of fire racing toward the ravine. Clara grabbed the calf, but there was no way out. Fire on 3 sides, too steep to climb on the 4th. Then Eli was there, sliding down beside her. Without a word, he shed his coat and threw it over her and the calf. When I say run, you go straight through. Don't stop. What about you? I'll be right behind. He pulled her against him, shielding her with his body. Now! They burst through the wall of flame together, Eli's coat protecting them from the worst of it. On the other side, Clara stumbled and would have fallen if Eli hadn't caught her. For a moment they stood pressed together, rain sizzling on their hot clothes, both breathing hard. The fire reflected in his eyes, turning them from winter blue to molten silver. Clara became acutely aware of his arms around her, of the solid warmth of his chest against hers. Without thought, without plan, she rose up on her toes and kissed him. For a heartbeat, Eli went completely still. Then his arms tightened, and he was kissing her back with an intensity that had nothing to do with business arrangements or convenience. The storm raged around them, but Clara felt only heat from the fire, from him, from the electricity between them that had nothing to do with lightning. Asterisk, his first kiss lit the silent prairie afire. When they broke apart, both were shaking. Eli's hand came up to touch her face with a gentleness that contrasted sharply with the violence of the storm. Clara, don't. She pressed a finger to his lips. Don't tell me this was a mistake. Not tonight. He caught her hand, held it. I was going to say we should get back before Sam worries himself sick. They found the boy still faithfully ringing the bell, tears of relief streaming down his face when he saw them emerge from the smoke. The fire, robbed of fuel by the draw and beaten back by the increasing rain, began to die. Later, after they'd changed into dry clothes and Sam had been reassured a dozen times that they were truly all right, Clara found herself alone with Eli in the kitchen. He was making coffee with careful movements, as if the familiar task could restore some equilibrium. About what happened out there, he began. Changed everything, Clara supplied. Yeah. He turned to face her. I gave you my word this would be business. And I set the terms. She moved closer, noting how he tensed but didn't retreat. I'm amending them. The hearing tomorrow makes this more important, not less. Clara took a breath, choosing honesty. If they're going to examine our marriage, let's give them something real to examine. Eli set down the coffee pot with excessive care. You don't know what you're asking. I'm asking for the truth between us. No more walls, no more pretense. She touched the scar on his hand, the one he'd gotten saving the calves. We could die tomorrow. Eli, from fire, from Wexler's men, from a judge's decree. I'm tired of living like I'm already dead. He was silent for so long she thought he'd refuse. Then, I dream about you. The words seemed pulled from him. Started the night after we married. Told myself it was just proximity, just biology. But when I saw you in that fire tonight, thought I might lose you. He shook his head. I'm no good at pretty words. Clara, I don't need pretty words. She stepped into his space, felt him trembling with restraint. I need you. This time when they kissed, it was slower, deeper, with the knowledge of choice behind it. When they finally drew apart, Eli rested his forehead against hers. This complicates things. Clara laughed softly. Everything about us has been complicated from the start. A throat clearing from the doorway made them spring apart. Sam stood there, looking embarrassed but determined. Sorry to interrupt, but there's something you should see. He led them to the window. In the distance, barely visible through the rain, a group of riders sat watching the ranch. As they watched, one raised something that caught the light binoculars. Wexler's men, Eli said grimly. Making sure we're still here for tomorrow? Or making sure the fire did its job? Clara added. She noticed Sam's frightened expression and squeezed his shoulder. It's all right. We're ready for them. But as they prepared for bed, Eli still insisting on taking the downstairs sofa despite everything, Clara wondered if they really were ready. Tomorrow, they'd face Judge Harlan's court, where truth and law were malleable things in the right hands. Their marriage, barely begun to transform from convenience to something real, would be dissected and judged. She paused at her bedroom door, looking back at Eli.
Whatever happens tomorrow,
We face it together, he finished. No more running, no more hiding. Sam piped up from his small room.
all three of us, right?
All three of us, Clara confirmed, warmth filling her chest. They might not be a family by blood, but they were becoming one by choice, forged in fire and storm, tested by threats and bound by something stronger than law. The storm continued through the night, but inside the ranch house, 3 people slept better than they had in weeks. Tomorrow would bring its trials, but tonight they had each other, and that was enough. When dawn broke clear and clean, washing the prairie in gold and revealing the black scar where fire had claimed the grass, Clara rose to find Eli already up, cleaned and shaved and wearing his good shirt. "Ready?" he asked, and she knew he meant for more than just the hearing. "Ready," she confirmed, and meant it. They would go to town as what they were, a family united, prepared to fight for their home and their future. And if Judge Harlan thought his courtroom intimidation would break them, he was about to learn what Clara had discovered in the storm. Some things, once ignited, couldn't be extinguished. The prairie might be scarred, but it would grow back stronger. So would they. The courthouse in Red Willow had never been designed for crowds. Built from local timber and meant to serve a small frontier town, it groaned under the weight of curious townspeople who'd come to witness the territorial hearing. Judge Harlan sat behind his elevated bench like a vulture on a fence post, black robes adding to the impression of impending doom. "This hearing will determine the validity of the marriage between Clara Danner and Eli Danner," Harlan intoned, his voice carrying theatrical gravity. "The territory has reason to believe this union was contracted fraudulently, with the sole purpose of circumventing property laws." Silas Vexler sat in the front row, gold watch chain catching the morning light streaming through dusty windows. He wore the satisfied expression of a man whose victory was assured. Behind him, Big Jim Sawyer and several other hired men lounged with studied casualness. Clara sat very straight beside Eli. Sam pressed close to her other side. She'd worn her best dress, the blue wool Thomas had bought her for their anniversary, and tried not to think about how this mockery of justice was taking place in the same room where Thomas had once upheld actual law. "Mr. Danner," Judge Harlan began, "how long had you known Mrs. Whitmore before your marriage?" Eli's voice was steady.
I worked the Whitmore Ranch for about a year, Your Honor.
"And in that time, how many conversations did you have with the lady?"
Not many. I did my work. She did hers.
"Yet within days of Sheriff Whitmore's death, you married her?" Harlan leaned forward. "Quite convenient. Wouldn't you say practical?" Eli corrected. "She needed protection under the law. I had a debt to her late husband."
"Ah, yes, this mysterious debt."
Harlan shuffled papers with theatrical flair. "Can you elaborate on the nature of this obligation?" Clara saw Eli's jaw tighten. This was dangerous ground. Any mention of his past could be twisted against them. "Thomas Whitmore gave me work when no one else would," Eli said simply. "That earned my loyalty." "How touching." Harlan's smile was reptilian. "Tell me, Mr. Danner, do you and your wife share a bedroom?" The crowd murmured at the indelicate question. Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks, but kept her expression neutral. "That's not relevant to property law," she interjected. "On the contrary, Mrs. Danner, the territory has an interest in preventing sham marriages designed to defraud the system." Harlan's eyes glittered with malice. "Answer the question, Mr. Danner." Before Eli could respond, the courtroom door burst open. Margaret Wells, the new schoolteacher, hurried in, rain still dripping from her coat despite the clear morning. "Your Honor," she said breathlessly, "I have information vital to these proceedings." Harlan's face darkened. "This is a closed hearing. Miss Wells? Then you'll want to close it to Mr. Vexler as well, Margaret replied, producing a leather portfolio. Since he's not a disinterested party, but rather the one who stands to gain from this couple's dispossession. Objection! Vexler rose, his composure cracking. This woman has no standing here. I worked for the Territorial Survey Office in Denver before coming to Red Willow, Margaret announced. I have documents proving Mr. Vexler has been systematically moving survey markers along Willow Creek, aided by someone in this very courthouse. The murmur of the crowd rose to a roar. Harland hammered his gavel repeatedly. Order, Miss Wells. These are serious accusations. With serious proof. Margaret opened her portfolio. Survey maps, before and after, payment vouchers. And this, she held up a familiar gold watch, found at the site of the damaged water dam. The inscription reads S.V., Silas Vexler. Clara felt a surge of hope, but Vexler was already on his feet. Preposterous, that watch was stolen from my room. Anyone could have planted it. Then explain this, Clara said, standing and pulling out Thomas's reconstructed notebook pages. My husband was investigating the survey fraud when he died. These notes show someone with the initials SV was paying for information about property boundaries. Hearsay and speculation. Harland ruled quickly. None of this pertains to the matter at hand, the validity of this marriage. It pertains to motive. A new voice said from the doorway. Johansson, the blacksmith, entered with several other townsfolk behind him. We've been talking, Your Honor. Seems like Mr. Vexler's been mighty interested in forcing folks off their land lately. The Morrisons, the Clearys, now the Danners. This is not a town meeting, Harland spluttered. No, it's a railroad takeover disguised as justice. Clara shot back. She turned to address the crowd. How many of you have been pressured to sell? How many have had water rights threatened? Cattle stolen? Property damaged? Hands raised throughout the room. The murmur grew to angry voices. Order! Harland's gavel cracked from the force of his blows. Clear this courtroom immediately, or I'll have everyone arrested. On whose authority? The question came from Eli, who'd remained silent through the chaos. Now he stood, and something in his bearing made the room quiet. See, I've been reading up on territorial law. A judge who has financial interest in a case must recuse himself. How much is Vexler paying you? Harland. The judge's face went from red to purple. How dare you? I dare because my wife dares. Eli's voice carried the kind of quiet authority that comes from absolute conviction. She stood up to your schemes from the beginning, kept fighting even when you killed her husband. That's slander, Vexler shouted. Is it? Eli pulled out a crumpled paper. This is a receipt from the Dusty Star Saloon. Night before Thomas died, Big Jim Sawyer bought a bottle of whiskey. Same kind found broken near Thomas's body. Barkeep remembers Sawyer saying he had business to settle with the sheriff. Circumstantial, Harland began. Like the hoof prints at Miller's Ford matching Sawyer's horse, like the fact that Thomas was investigating survey fraud and ended up dead. Eli's winter eyes fixed on Sawyer. Like the fact that you threatened my wife with the same fate just last week. Sawyer's hand moved toward his gun, but stopped as several townsmen shifted position, hands on their own weapons. The mood in the room had turned dangerous. Your Honor, Margaret Wells spoke into the tense silence. I move that this hearing be suspended pending investigation by federal marshals. The territorial capital needs to know what's happening here. Seconded, called out Dr. Marcus Finch, the town physician. I treated Sheriff Whitmore. Those injuries weren't consistent with a simple fall from a horse. Harland looked around the room. Seeing former allies now eyeing him with suspicion, his gaze found Vexler, who gave a slight nod. This hearing finds the marriage between Eli and Clara Danner to be, Your Honor. Reverend Peyton stood slowly. Everyone turned in surprise. The minister had been Harland's most reliable supporter. Before you rule, I must speak, Reverend Harlan's voice cracked. "I've prayed on this matter extensively." Peyton's hands trembled slightly. "What I've seen, what I've been party to, it weighs on my soul. These people," he gestured to Clara and Eli, "whatever the circumstances of their union, they've shown more Christian charity than those who would steal in law's name." "You forget yourself, Reverend," Wexler warned softly. "No, Mr. Wexler. I'm remembering myself." Peyton straightened his shoulders. "I won't be party to theft and murder disguised as progress anymore." The courtroom erupted. Harlan's gavel was useless against the tide of voices. Through it all, Clara noticed Wexler making subtle signals to his men. Whatever happened with the hearing, he wasn't prepared to accept defeat. "Eli," she warned quietly. He'd seen it too, as Harlan desperately called for order. Wexler stood and walked to the front of the room. His urbane mask had slipped, revealing something cold and reptilian beneath. "Enough of this charade," he announced. "Judge Harlan, I move for immediate judgment. Find against the Danners, or I'll withdraw my support for your re-election campaign." The naked threat hung in the air. Harlan's face showed his struggle between Wexler's money and the crowd's growing anger. This hearing," Harlan stuttered, "is over," Clara declared. She stood and faced the room. "We'll wait for federal marshals. Until then, anyone trying to force us from our land will be met with appropriate resistance." "You can't threaten officers of the court," Wexler snarled. "I'm not threatening anyone," Clara replied calmly. "I'm stating facts. We will defend what's ours." "With what a washed-up gunslinger and a boy," Wexler's laugh was ugly. "You've lost Mrs. Danner. Accept it gracefully." "She's not alone," Margaret Wells said, stepping forward. "I'll be filing my report with Denver tomorrow." "Nor is she defenseless," Johansson added. "Some of us remember when this town stood for something besides railroad money. One by one, townspeople stood. Not all some remained seated, cowed or complicit, but enough. Enough to show that Red Willow hadn't completely sold its soul." Wexler's composure finally cracked entirely. "You fools, do you think you can stop progress? The railroad will come through here one way or another. Those who stand in the way get crushed." "Like Thomas Whitmore got crushed?" Clara asked quietly. The silence that followed was deafening. Wexler realized his mistake immediately, but the words couldn't be taken back. "I meant economically." "We all heard what you meant." "Doctor," Finch interrupted, "and I think federal investigators will be very interested in Sheriff Whitmore's autopsy results." Harlan finally found his voice. "This hearing is postponed indefinitely. All parties will maintain current status until federal authorities can review the matter." "No," Wexler turned on him. "You were paid." "To facilitate legal land transfers," Harlan said quickly, sweating profusely. "Nothing more. Court is adjourned." He fled the bench with undignified haste. The courtroom began to empty, people talking excitedly. Several stopped to shake Clara's hand or nod respectfully to Eli. But Wexler remained, his men gathering around him. His eyes found Clara's, and the hatred there was palpable. "This isn't over," he said softly. "Not by half." "No," Eli agreed, moving protectively closer to Clara and Sam. "But your easy victory is, from now on, you'll have to fight for every inch." They left together Clara, Eli, Sam, Margaret, and several sympathetic townspeople. Outside, the sun shone bright on rain-washed streets. The storm had passed, but Clara knew another was brewing. "They'll come for us," she said quietly to Eli. "Let them." He took her hand, a public declaration worth more than words. "We'll be ready." Sam tugged on Clara's dress. "Does this mean we get to stay together?" Clara looked at Eli, saw her own determination mirrored in his winter eyes. "Yes, Sam, we stay together. All of us." As they walked toward their wagon, Clara noticed Vexler watching from the courthouse steps. His gold watch caught the light as he pulled it out, checking the time, planning his next move. But for now, they'd won a reprieve. And sometimes, Clara thought as Eli helped her into the wagon, his hand lingering on hers, sometimes a reprieve was all you needed to turn the tide of war. The smell of smoke woke Clara from uneasy sleep. For a moment, she thought she was dreaming of the Prairie fire again. But then Eli's voice cut through the darkness, urgent and commanding.
Get up, they're burning the hay barn.
Clara scrambled from bed, pulling on her dressing gown as she ran. Through the window, orange flames were already consuming the structure where they'd stored winter feed for the cattle. Without that hay, the herd would starve. "Sam," she called, but the boy was already in the hallway, clutching the old Walker Colt. "It's not loaded," he said quickly. "But I remembered what Eli said about showing iron."
Good boy. Stay inside and watch from the windows.
Clara grabbed Thomas's rifle and headed for the door, where Eli was already armed and ready. "How many?" she asked. "4, maybe 5. They scattered after setting the fire." His face was grim in the reflected firelight. "This is just the beginning. They're trying to burn us out piece by piece." They worked through the night, forming a bucket brigade with the few neighbors who'd ridden over after seeing the flames. Johansson, the blacksmith, worked like a man possessed, his massive arms never seeming to tire. Margaret Wells appeared in men's trousers, shocking some but proving surprisingly effective at manning the pump. By dawn, they'd saved about half the hay, though the barn itself was a total loss. Clara stood surveying the damage, soot-stained and exhausted. "Could have been worse," Eli said, coming to stand beside her. His shirt was singed in several places, and a burn marked his forearm where a falling timber had caught him. "They'll try again," Clara said flatly. "Yes," he didn't try to soften it, "but we gained something tonight." She followed his gaze to where their neighbors were sharing coffee and cold biscuits, bonds forged in shared danger. Even people who'd been neutral before were angry now the fire could have spread to town if the wind had shifted. "Mr. Danner," a young voice called. They turned to see Timothy Morrison, Sam's friend from school, riding up on a lathered horse. "My PA sent me. Says there's trouble at the water cooperative. Mr. Vexler's men are blocking access to the reservoir." Clara's heart sank. Without water rights, the ranch was doomed as surely as if they'd burned every building. "How many men?" "Dozen or more, ma'am, all armed. They got legal papers, they say. New water rights agreement that gives first claim to the railroad." "Legal papers from Judge Harland, no doubt," Margaret said with disgust. "Even after yesterday's hearing, he's still playing Vexler's game." Eli was already moving toward his horse. "We need to get there before—" A rifle shot cracked across the morning air. Everyone ducked instinctively, but the bullet hadn't been aimed at them. It struck the ground near Clara's feet, kicking up dust. A second shot followed, then a third, keeping them pinned behind the water trough. "Nobody move!" Big Jim Sawyer's voice boomed from the ridge overlooking the ranch. "This is just a friendly warning. Anyone rides toward that reservoir today won't ride back." Clara counted muzzle flashes, at least 6 riflemen positioned on the high ground. They were trapped.
What do you want? Sawyer,
she called out. "Simple enough. You sign over the water rights to Mr. Vexler, and we'll mosey along. Otherwise, we'll sit up here and pick off anyone who tries to leave. Your choice, lady." Eli started to move, but Clara caught his arm. She knew that look. He was calculating angles, planning violence. But 6 riflemen on high ground was suicide, even for him. "Wait," she whispered. Then, louder, "I need to see these papers you mentioned."
Tim's got 'em,
Sawyer called back. "Send the boy up slow and easy." Timothy Morrison looked terrified but determined. At Clara's nod, he dismounted and walked up the slope, hands visible. He returned with a leather folder. The documents were what Clara expected, a water rights transfer giving Wexler's railroad company priority access to all water sources along Willow Creek. The signature line waited for her name. "It's not legal," Margaret said, reading over her shoulder. "Water rights were established by the Homestead Act. They can't just—" Another rifle shot, closer this time.
We ain't here to debate law,"
Sawyer shouted.
"Sign or starve. Your choice."
Clara looked around at the faces watching her, Eli tense and ready for violence. Sam pale but resolute. Her neighbors angry but outgunned. The morning sun climbed higher, promising another scorching day. Without water, they'd lose everything within a week. "I need time to read this properly," she called. "You got 1 hour," Sawyer replied. "Then we start shooting horses. After that, we get less friendly." The group retreated into the house. Eli immediately went to the windows, checking sight lines and counting enemies. Sam started to follow, but Clara directed him to help Margaret with the wounded. Several people had burns from fighting the fire. "We can't sign," Johansson said bluntly. "Give Wexler water rights, and half the county dies." "But if we don't—" Clara left it unfinished. They all understood the mathematics of their situation. "I could try to reach town." Timothy offered bravely, "Get help." "They'd shoot you before you made it half a mile," Eli said without looking away from his window. "They've got the approaches covered." Clara studied the documents again, her tired mind trying to find some loophole, some way out. Then she noticed something, a surveyor's mark on the attached map, partially obscured by coffee stains but still visible. "Margaret, you worked for the survey office. Look at this." The schoolteacher bent over the map, then gasped. "These boundary markers, they're wrong. This shows Willow Creek running a full mile east of its actual course." Meaning this document gives Wexler rights to water that doesn't exist where he claims it does. Margaret's eyes lit with hope. It's fraud, but more importantly, it's useless fraud. Even if you signed, he couldn't enforce it without revealing the deception. Clara felt a spark of hope, but Eli's voice doused it.
"Riders coming! 4 more men!"
Through the window, Clara saw reinforcements joining Sawyer's group, but these weren't typical hired guns. They wore black dusters despite the heat, and their faces were covered with bandanas. Something about their bearing made her stomach clench with dread. "I know those men," Eli said quietly. "Kellerman's bunch. Worked the Johnson County War." He turned from the window, and Clara saw something she'd never seen in his eyes before, fear.
"They don't take prisoners."
"Then we fight," Johansson declared, checking his old Spencer rifle. "Against professional killers." Eli shook his head.
"That's not fighting. That's dying."
"So we just give up?" Sam demanded, tears of frustration in his young eyes. "No." Clara stood. Decision made. "We play for time. I'll go out and negotiate. Demand to see Wexler personally before signing anything." "Absolutely not," Eli said flatly. "It's the only way. They won't shoot me. I'm the one they need to sign." She grabbed the documents. "While I'm talking, you figure out how to get word to town. There must be someone who'll help." Before anyone could stop her, Clara walked out the front door, hands visible, documents in plain sight. The morning sun beat down mercilessly as she walked toward the ridge. "That's far enough," Sawyer called when she was halfway. "I want to speak to Mr. Wexler," Clara announced. "If he wants my signature, he can ask for it himself." There was murmured consultation among the gunmen. Then one of the black-dusted riders spurred forward, stopping just out of comfortable speaking distance. When he pulled down his bandana, Clara recognized the sharp features of Jack Kellerman, whose reputation for violence stretched from Texas to Montana. "Ma'am," he said with mock courtesy. "Mr. Wexler's indisposed, but he sent us to ensure his interests are protected." "And what interest does a killer from Wyoming have in our water rights?" Kellerman smiled, a cold expression that never touched his eyes. Now that's unfriendly. I'm just a businessman protecting investments. Sign the papers, and we'll be on our way. I need guarantees. My people get water access after the railroad's needs are met. Sign first, negotiate later. Clara played for time, arguing details and demanding clarifications. Behind her, she hoped Eli was finding some solution. But the sun climbed higher, and Kellerman's patience visibly thinned. Enough talk, he said finally. Sign now, or we start with the boy. Clara's blood froze. You wouldn't... Try me. Kellerman drew his pistol, aiming past her toward the house. That window there, that's where the kid's watching, isn't it? Before Clara could respond, a new voice cut through the morning air. That's enough, Kellerman. Everyone turned. Riding up the main road came a group of men Clara didn't recognize. They wore no uniforms, but their bearing suggested military experience. At their head rode a grizzled man with sergeant's stripes on his worn cavalry jacket. This ain't your concern, McBride, Kellerman called, but uncertainty colored his tone. Federal marshals say otherwise. Sergeant McBride replied, producing a badge. Got word of land fraud and intimidation. Seems we arrived just in time. Clara nearly sagged with relief. Margaret must have sent her report after all, and someone in Denver had actually responded. But Kellerman wasn't retreating yet. You got no jurisdiction here, old man. This is a private business matter. Murder and arson aren't private business, McBride replied calmly. Neither is threatening civilians. You boys want to test federal authority. I've got 6 men here who'll oblige you. The standoff stretched taut. Clara stood between the two groups, very aware that she'd make the first casualty if shooting started. Then Eli's voice called from the house. Kellerman, remember Sanderson's crossing? The gunman's head snapped toward the house. Danner, that you? It is. Remember what you owed me after that mess? I'm calling it in now. Right away. For a long moment, Kellerman sat frozen. Then he holstered his weapon with a curse. This ain't over. Danner, dead or no dead? Yes, it is. Sergeant McBride interrupted. You and your men have 1 hour to leave the county. After that, you're federal fugitives. Sawyer started to protest, but Kellerman cut him off with a gesture. We're done here. For now. They rode away in a cloud of dust, leaving Clara standing in the sudden quiet. McBride dismounted and approached her. Mrs. Danner, we need to take your statement about what's been happening here. The next hour passed in a blur. Federal marshals took statements, examined the fraudulent documents, and cataloged evidence of arson. Wexler himself was nowhere to be found, already fled when word of federal involvement reached town. As the sun reached its zenith, Clara found herself alone with Eli by the ruins of the barn. He was staring at the horizon where Kellerman's group had vanished. Sanderson's crossing, she asked quietly. Long story. Bad business from worse times. He turned to her, and she saw the weight of it in his eyes. I saved his life once. Never thought I'd be glad of it. You called in a debt to protect us. To protect you. The distinction mattered to him. Clara, what you did out there walking into their guns, that was the bravest and most foolish thing I've ever seen. I learned from the best, she said with a weak smile. My husband tends toward brave foolishness himself. He pulled her close then, heedless of the soot and sweat that covered them both. Don't ever do it again. Can't promise that. She rested her head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. But I can promise we'll face whatever comes next together. A throat clearing made them turn. Sam stood there with Margaret and Sergeant McBride. Sorry to interrupt, McBride said, but we need to discuss next steps. Wexler's gone, but his claim on the water rights still needs legal challenge. And there's the matter of Sheriff Whitmore's death to investigate. Clara straightened, steel returning to her spine. The battle was won, but the war continued. Then let's get started. Sergeant, we've got a ranch to save and justice to seek. As they walked back to the house, Sam slipped his hand into hers. "We won, didn't we?" "This round," Eli answered, his hand finding Clara's other one. "But yes, Sam, we won." The federal presence had bought them time and legitimacy. But Clara knew Wexler wouldn't give up easily. He'd invested too much in his scheme to abandon it now. The next attack would be subtler, more dangerous. But looking at the people gathered in her home neighbors who'd become allies, a thrown-together family bound by choice and circumstance, Clara felt hope kindling like new fire. They'd survived the night. They'd survived the siege. Whatever came next, they'd survive that too. The territorial courthouse in Cheyenne was a far grander affair than Red Willow's simple wooden structure. 3 stories of red brick and limestone rose against the autumn sky, its columns suggesting authority and permanence. Clara adjusted her best dress nervously as they climbed the steps, very aware of the armed federal marshals who had escorted them on the 2-day journey. "Remember," Sergeant McBride advised quietly, "tell the truth. Stick to facts, and don't let the defense lawyers rattle you." Inside, the courtroom was already packed. Word of the case had spread: a widow fighting railroad corruption, a mysterious gunman turned protective husband, fraud and murder in a small frontier town. Newspaper reporters from Denver and even Chicago filled the front rows, pencils ready. Judge Theodore Blackstone presided, a man whose reputation for fairness was matched only by his intolerance for corruption. His gray beard and piercing eyes gave him an Old Testament appearance that seemed fitting for the moment. The territory of Wyoming versus Silas Wexler, Harold Harland, and James Sawyer. The bailiff announced, "Charges include fraud, conspiracy, intimidation, and suspected murder." Clara spotted the defendants at their table. Wexler looked diminished without his usual arrogance, though his gold watch chain still gleamed. Harland appeared to have aged a decade in the weeks since his arrest. Big Jim Sawyer sat sullenly, his bulk constrained by shackles. The territorial prosecutor, Adam Hensley, rose first. "Your Honor, we'll show that these men conspired to defraud homesteaders of their legally held land through manipulation of surveys, intimidation, and violence. We'll prove that Sheriff Thomas Whitmore died not from accident but from murder, silenced because he'd uncovered their scheme." The defense lawyer, an oily man named Cornelius Stark from San Francisco, countered smoothly, "My clients are businessmen, Your Honor, engaged in the legitimate development of territorial resources. Any violence was the work of overzealous employees acting without authority." Clara was called to testify first. She walked to the witness chair on steady legs, though her heart raced. After being sworn in, Hensley began with gentle questions about her life with Thomas, establishing her as a sympathetic figure. "Mrs. Danner, please tell the court about finding your late husband's notebook." Clara described the torn pages, the cryptic references to Wexler and moved survey markers. She produced the reconstructed notebook, entered as evidence. As she spoke, she was aware of Eli watching from the gallery, his presence a steady anchor. "And what happened after you refused to sell your water rights?" Hensley prompted. She detailed the escalating harassment: cut fences, stolen cattle, the barn burning. When she described Kellerman's guns trained on her home, threatening Sam, several jury members shifted angrily. Stark rose for cross-examination, his smile sharp as a blade. "Mrs. Danner, isn't it true you married Eli Danner mere days after your husband's death? To preserve my property rights under territorial law?" "Yes." "How convenient. Tell me, what do you know of your current husband's past?" Hensley objected, but Stark pressed on. "Isn't it possible that a man of violent reputation might have influenced these events? Perhaps eliminated your first husband to claim you himself?" Clara's temper flared. "That's a vile suggestion with no basis in fact." "Is it your husband is known to have ridden with questionable men, to have sold his gun?" "My husband," Clara said firmly, "gave up violence to work honestly. He protected our home when your clients tried to burn us out. If you're looking for men of violent reputation, look at your own table." Ripples of approval ran through the gallery. Judge Blackstone gavelled for order but seemed pleased by her response. Margaret Wells testified next, producing survey documents that clearly showed tampering. Her time in the Denver office gave her testimony particular weight. She explained how markers had been moved systematically, always to benefit railroad routes at homesteaders' expense. "I found payment authorizations signed by Mr. Vexler," she stated, showing the documents. "Payments to surveyors for boundary adjustments. The dates correspond exactly with the fraudulent surveys." Dr. Marcus Finch's testimony was perhaps the most damaging. The physician described Thomas's injuries in clinical detail. The angle of the head wound was inconsistent with a fall from a horse. The pattern suggested a blow from behind with a heavy object. "Could you determine what kind of object?" Hensley asked. "Something with a curved surface, like a pistol butt or pick handle." Hensley produced a pick handle found at Sawyer's residence, still showing dark stains. The jury leaned forward as one. When Eli was called, tension filled the courtroom. His reputation had preceded him, and spectators whispered as he took the oath. But his testimony was controlled, factual. He described the night riders, the threats, Sawyer's near confession about Thomas. Stark attacked hard during cross-examination. "Mr. Danner, have you ever killed a man?" "Yes." "How many?" Eli met his gaze steadily. "I stopped counting after Antietam. I mean after the war, as a hired gun. I protected people and property. Sometimes that required violence. Like when you shot Marcus Kelly in Abilene or the Thornton brothers in Dodge. Kelly was robbing a bank. The Thorntons had murdered a family." Eli's voice remained level. "I've never killed except when law or survival demanded it. And Sheriff Whitmore did survival demand his death." Eli's eyes went cold. "Thomas Whitmore gave me a chance to change my life. I'd have died before harming him. Or killed to avenge him. I'm here testifying in court. Aren't I if I wanted vengeance? Would I trust the law?" It was a strong response, and Clara saw several jury members nod approvingly. The defense presented their case over 2 days, calling witnesses who testified to Vexler's business acumen and charitable donations, but Hensley demolished each one, showing how the charity masked bribery, how business success came through fraud. The turning point came when Sam was called. There had been debate about having him testify, but the boy had insisted. He sat in the witness chair, feet not quite touching the floor, and told his story simply. "Sheriff Whitmore helped my family when men tried to steal our land. He was investigating the survey markers when he died." Sam's young voice carried clearly. "After Pa died and our well went bad, Ma sent me to find Mrs. Clara. Said she'd know what to do." "And did she?" Hensley asked gently. "Yes, sir. She and Mr. Eli took me in. They fought the bad men when they came." Sam looked directly at Vexler. "That one there, with the gold watch, he said the railroad needed our land for progress. But it wasn't progress. It was just stealing." Even Stark didn't attempt to cross-examine a child whose parents had died from Vexler's scheme. Judge Harlan broke on the 4th day, offered a reduced sentence for cooperation. He detailed the entire conspiracy. Vexler had paid him thousands to facilitate fraudulent land transfers. Survey markers were moved at night. Homesteaders who resisted faced escalating harassment until they sold or fled. "And Sheriff Whitmore," Hensley pressed. Harlan's voice dropped to a whisper. "He had evidence. Was going to the federal marshals. Vexler said it had to be handled." "Who handled it?" "Sawyer. Made it look like an accident, but—" Harlan trailed off, shoulders slumping. The courtroom erupted. Judge Blackstone gavelled repeatedly for order while Sawyer lunged at Harlan, roaring curses. It took 4 marshals to restrain him. Vexler took the stand in his own defense, maintaining his composure. He painted himself as a visionary bringing civilization to the frontier, claimed ignorance of any violence. But Hensley had saved his best evidence for last. "Mr. Wexler, do you recognize this?" He produced the gold watch found at the damaged dam. "It's similar to mine." "Indeed. And this," a ledger appeared, "seized from Wexler's hotel room. Your private accounts. I believe this entry here, payment to JS for permanent solution to TW problem. JS would be James Sawyer, TW would be Thomas Whitmore." Wexler's composure finally cracked. "I want to speak to my lawyer." "You're speaking to the court, Mr. Wexler. Did you order Sheriff Whitmore's death?" It wasn't. He was obstructing progress." The admission hung in the air like a thunderclap. Even Stark looked defeated. Closing arguments were almost anticlimactic after that. Hensley painted a picture of greed run amok, of men who saw the frontier as a personal piggy bank. Stark did his best, arguing that Wexler was guilty of overzealousness, not murder. That frontier justice had simply gotten out of hand. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. When they filed back in, their faces were grim but determined. "On the charge of conspiracy to commit fraud, we find all defendants guilty. On the charge of murder in the first degree, we find Silas Wexler and James Sawyer guilty. On the charge of corruption of office, we find Harold Harland guilty." Clara sagged against Eli as the verdicts were read. It was over. Justice for Thomas, finally. Judge Blackstone's sentences were severe. Wexler and Sawyer would hang. Harland would serve 20 years hard labor. All fraudulent land transfers were void. Water rights reverted to original homestead claims. As they left the courthouse, reporters crowded around, shouting questions. But Clara had eyes only for her small family, Eli solid beside her, Sam clutching her hand. "Is it really over?" Sam asked. "The legal part," Eli answered. "Now we go home and build something better." Sergeant McBride shook their hands. "You folks showed real courage. The territory owes you a debt." "We just wanted to keep our home," Clara said simply. That evening, in their hotel room with Sam asleep in the adjoining chamber, Clara finally let herself cry. Eli held her as months of tension and grief poured out. "He got justice," Eli murmured against her hair. "Thomas can rest now." "And us," Clara pulled back to look at him. "Can we rest?" "We can try." He touched her face gently. "We can build that life we talked about. Real partners, real family." "I love you," she said, the words coming easily now. "Not because I needed you, not because the law required it, just because I love you too," he replied, wonder in his voice. "Never thought I'd say those words and mean them. Never thought I'd have the chance." Outside, Cheyenne bustled with evening life, but in their room, 2 people who'd found each other through tragedy held tight to hope. Tomorrow they'd return to Red Willow, to their ranch and their future. The Prairie had tested them with drought and fire. Men had tested them with greed and violence. They'd survived it all. Now came the harder test, building a life worth living from the ashes of the past. Clara fell asleep in Eli's arms, thinking of green grass after rain, of Sam's laughter, of mornings when the only sound would be cattle lowing and coffee brewing. Simple things, precious things. Things worth fighting for, things they'd won the right to claim. The first drops of rain began at dawn, gentle as a whisper against the window pane. Clara woke to the sound, for a moment unable to place the soft patter. Then understanding dawned, and she shook Eli awake. "Listen," she breathed. He came alert instantly, old habits dying hard, then relaxed as he recognized the sound. "Rain," he said, wonder coloring the single word. They dressed quickly and stepped onto the porch, Sam joining them moments later, still rubbing sleep from his eyes. Together they watched as clouds, absent for so long, released their burden onto the parched earth. The smell of rain on dry soil rose like incense. sweet and earthy and full of promise. "First rain of autumn," Sam said, holding out his hands to catch the drops. "Means the drought's breaking, right. Means hope," Clara answered, pulling him close. "Always means hope." The weeks since their return from Cheyenne had been ones of hard work and gradual healing, with Vexler's scheme exposed and his conspirators imprisoned or hanged. Red Willow had begun to find its soul again. Neighbors who'd been set against each other by fear and greed slowly rebuilt trust. The community irrigation project Clara had proposed finally moved forward. Without Vexler's interference, ranchers worked together, digging channels and building simple but effective water-sharing systems. Even former enemies found common ground in the shared labor. "Morning, Danners." The call came from their gate, where Johansson sat in his wagon with several other townsfolk. "Ready to finish that west channel." Eli grabbed his tools while Clara packed food for the workers. It had become their routine shared labor followed by shared meals, rebuilding community one ditch and one conversation at a time. At the building site, Clara was surprised to see Reverend Peyton among the workers, sleeves rolled up and shovel in hand. He'd been scarce since the trial, shame keeping him largely confined to his parsonage. "Reverend," she greeted carefully. He looked up, face reddening. "Mrs. Danner, I wanted to help, to make some small amends for my part in what happened." Clara studied him, seeing genuine remorse. "We all make mistakes, Reverend. What matters is what we do after." His eyes filled with tears. "Your husband Thomas, he tried to tell me, said Vexler was poisoning the town. I didn't listen, too blinded by donations to the church fund." "Thomas believed in redemption," Clara said gently. "So do I. Now, let's get this channel dug before the rain gets heavier." The work went quickly with so many hands. By noon, water was flowing through the new channel, ready to be directed to different properties as needed. The sight of it, neighbors working together, water flowing freely, filled Clara with quiet satisfaction. That evening, she found Eli in what had been Thomas's study, now converted to farm office and workspace. He was carving something, wood shavings curling beneath his careful knife work. "What's that?" she asked, settling beside him. He held up the piece of wooden cross, simple but beautifully crafted. "Sam asked if we could put up something permanent for Thomas. Thought this might serve." Clara touched the smooth wood. Throat tight. "It's perfect." "There's more." From his pocket, Eli produced official-looking papers. "Adoption documents. If you're willing, we can make it legal. Sam being our son, proper and official." Clara's vision blurred. "You've already talked to him." "Wanted to be sure he'd want us as much as we want him." Eli's smile was soft. "Boy nearly knocked me over with his hug." They signed the papers that night, Sam's signature careful and proud between theirs. A family not by blood but by choice, forged in trial and sealed in love. The next morning dawned clear after the night's rain. The prairie washed clean and already showing hints of green. They rode out together to the small cemetery on the hill, the wooden cross wrapped carefully in oilcloth. At Thomas's grave, they worked in companionable silence, setting the new marker deep and true. When it was done, Clara knelt and traced her first husband's name with gentle fingers. "He'd be glad," she said quietly, "knowing we're taking care of each other, building what he dreamed of." Eli's hand settled on her shoulder. "He was a good man, best I ever knew." "You're a good man too," Clara said, covering his hand with hers. "Took me a while to see it past all that winter in your eyes, but it was always there." Sam placed a small bunch of prairie flowers at the base of the cross-yellow blazing star and purple aster, late bloomers that had survived the drought. "Thank you, Sheriff Thomas," he said solemnly, "for sending me to them." They stood together as the morning sun climbed. Three people bound by loss but defined by what they'd chosen to build from it. The prairie stretched endlessly around them, No longer the hostile expanse it had seemed months ago, but a canvas of possibility. Back at the ranch, they found unexpected visitors. Margaret Wells with a young man Clara didn't recognize. "This is Daniel Morrison," Margaret explained, and Clara saw Sam stiffen at the familiar surname. "He's been looking for his nephew." Clara's heart clenched. They'd known this day might come, that Sam might have surviving family somewhere. She felt Eli tense beside her, protective instincts flaring. Daniel Morrison was young, perhaps 25, with Sam's same dark hair and earnest eyes. "My brother wrote before he died. Said he'd sent Sam to find the sheriff's wife. I've been searching ever since." Sam pressed against Clara's side. "I don't know you," he said, voice small. "I know, son. Last time I saw you, you were barely walking." Daniel's voice was gentle. "I've got a small farm up in Montana territory. Nothing fancy, but it's home." The silence stretched, heavy with unspoken fears. Then Daniel continued. "Miss Wells explained what's happened here. How you folks took Sam in, fought for him." He met Clara's eyes. "I'm not here to tear up a family. Just wanted to know my nephew was safe." "You're welcome to visit," Eli said carefully. "Get to know each other." Daniel's relief was visible. "I'd like that. Maybe I could even settle nearby, been looking for good land. And Miss Wells says there might be opportunities here now that the railroad's dealing honest." Sam looked up at Clara and Eli, a question in his eyes. At their encouraging nods, he stepped forward. "You could stay for supper, if you want. Ma makes real good biscuits." Daniel's eyes widened at the ma, understanding passing across his face. "I'd be honored." The meal that followed was cautiously friendly. Stories shared and connections slowly built. Daniel told of his brother, giving Sam memories of parents he'd barely known. In return, he heard of Sam's courage during the Troubles, his quick learning, his place in their small family. "You've done well by him," Daniel said as the evening wound down. "Better than I could have, being alone and unsettled." "He's done well by us, too," Clara replied. "Gave us reason to fight when it would have been easier to give up." Margaret, who'd been quiet through dinner, finally spoke. "Daniel's been staying at the boarding house while he searches for Sam. I've been helping him navigate the area." The slight blush on her cheeks wasn't lost on Clara, who hid a smile. It seemed Red Willow might be gaining another good citizen. As their guests prepared to leave, Daniel shook Eli's hand firmly. "Thank you for protecting my nephew. I'd like to be part of his life, but I can see he's where he belongs. Family's not about blood alone." Eli replied, "Room for all kinds in a boy's life." After they left, Sam was quiet, processing the evening's revelations. Finally, he asked, "Does this change things? Am I still—" "You're still our son," Clara said firmly. "Official and forever. But now you have an uncle too, and that's a gift." "Like having more family instead of less." Sam worked through it. "Exactly." Eli confirmed, "Man can't have too much good family." The autumn days passed in a rhythm of work and recovery. The barn was rebuilt with help from neighbors, larger and stronger than before. The irrigation channels carried water fairly to all who needed it. Cattle grew fat on prairie grass renewed by rain. One evening, Clara found Eli standing by the east fence, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of rose and gold. She slipped her arm through his, content in the quiet companionship they'd built. "Thinking deep thoughts?" she asked. "Thinking how a year ago I was just a hired hand with a past I couldn't shake." He pulled her closer. "Now I've got a wife, a son, a home. Still can't quite believe it's real." "Believe it," Clara said. "We've earned every bit of it." From the house came Sam's voice, calling them for supper. Soon Daniel would join them again. Maybe Margaret too. The table that had once held only silence and grief now rang with conversation and laughter. As they walked back, Eli paused to hang something on the gatepost, the wooden sign he'd been working on in secret. It read simply, Danner Ranch Est, 1878. No more Whitmore Ranch? Clara asked, touched by his thoughtfulness in checking with her. Thomas built the foundation, Eli said. But what stands here now? We built together, all of us. Clara traced the carved letters, then smiled. I like it. New name for a new beginning. That night, after Sam was in bed and the house had settled into evening quiet, Clara and Eli sat on the porch swing Thomas had built years before. The stars spread endless above them, no longer cold and distant but familiar guides in the vast frontier sky. First kiss lit the prairie afire, Clara murmured, remembering that night of storm and flame that had changed everything between them. Rest of it's been keeping the fire burning, Eli replied, pressing a kiss to her hair. Good fire, though, kind that warms instead of destroys. In the distance, a coyote called, answered by another. The sound no longer seemed mournful, but simply part of the prairie's night song. Inside, Sam slept safe. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, fences to mend, stock to tend, life to build. But tonight, Clara thought, tonight they had peace. They had each other. They had hope. The prairie grass whispered in the wind, and if she listened closely, Clara could almost hear it saying, "Welcome home." The screen door creaked softly as Clara stood, taking Eli's hand. Come to bed, she said simply, and he rose to follow her inside. Behind them, the porch swing swayed gently in the evening breeze, and the wooden sign caught the moonlight. Danner Ranch built on love, tested by fire, standing strong against whatever storms might come. In the morning, there would be coffee brewing and bacon frying, Sam's laughter and the lowing of cattle, simple sounds of a life hard-won and deeply treasured. But for now, there was only the quiet of a frontier night and the knowledge that they'd found their way through darkness to something worth keeping. The first rain had fallen. The prairie was turning green again, and in a small ranch house in Wyoming territory, a family that had chosen each other settled in for peaceful sleep, knowing that tomorrow, whatever it might bring, they would face it together. Thank you so much for listening to this story with us tonight. I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Where are you listening from, whether you're unwinding after a long day in New York, falling asleep in London, or perhaps starting your morning in Sydney? Let's connect and share our thoughts about Clara and Eli's journey. If you enjoyed this tale of love, courage, and redemption in the Old West, please subscribe to Wild West Night for more authentic frontier stories. Hit that like button if this story touched your heart, and don't forget to press the hype button to help more listeners discover these carefully crafted tales of the American frontier. Sweet dreams, partners, and thank you for riding along with us tonight.